Hello, welcome to the Daily News Ukraine channel. Today is December 10th and our daily review of news about Ukraine. The Austrian weekly news magazine, Profil, has named President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky Person of the Year for his influence on the fate of Ukraine and the West. The relevant article was published on Profil's website, and Ukrinform correspondent reports. The article titled Volodymyr Zelensky, the man who shook up the free world, says that Zelensky has managed to be seen worldwide not only as the representative of Ukraine attacked by Russia, but as the man of the West. Anyone who sees themselves as part of the West intellectually, ideologically, and in real terms, and this applies to the Republic of Austria, as well as to Profil News magazine, comes to the unavoidable conclusion: Zelensky is our man. There is no lack of originality when the British newspaper Financial Times, the US magazine Time, and now also Profil, consider the same person to be the most important and influential person this year, the article reads. Profil mentions that, as Russia's full-scale invasion started on February 24, Zelensky decided not to leave the country and not to surrender, but ordered his army to resist. With this act of bravery, he earns respect, the article noted. Additionally, Zelensky managed to earn the support of the West. Again and again, he warns that Putin's attack on Ukraine is in fact an attack on the free world and that it must therefore side with Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky has absolutely no problem invoking Western values in his fight against Putin, and everyone understands what he means. It is a struggle for freedom and democratic self-determination, Profil explained. According to the article, Zelensky initiated the return of the West and also NATO, which had just been declared obsolete. Volodymyr Zelensky's influence on the fate of Ukraine and the West this year makes him Profil's Person of the Year from the point of view of the editorial team, the author of the article summed up. Last night, some main high-voltage grids and equipment were damaged in Russia's drone attack on energy objects in the Odesa region. The relevant statement was made by Ukrenergo National Power Company on Facebook, and Ukrinform correspondent reports. Last night, the enemy launched new strikes on energy objects in the Odesa region. Some main high-voltage grids and equipment were damaged. As a result, consumers in Odesa and the Odesa region were left without electricity, the report states. According to the company, the situation is very challenging in the Odesa region. Repair crews are working to restore energy supply for critical infrastructure objects, such as hospital, water supply system, water treatment facilities. Household consumers may have to wait longer for the restoration of energy supply services due to the large scale of destructions. Iran's plans to provide ballistic missiles to Russia in exchange for military technologies are a matter of global security. The relevant statement was made by advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine Mikhailo Podolyak on Twitter, and Ukrinform correspondent reports. Axis of evil is formed. Iran plans to provide ballistic missiles to RF, knowing they'll be used for war in Europe. RF helps Iran with military, nuclear technologies for blowing Middle East up. This is no longer a matter of Ukraine, but of global security. Are we just going to watch? Podolyak wrote. A reminder that Putin stated earlier that half of 300,000 mobilized soldiers are now in the combat zone and that Russia's aggression against Ukraine may become a lengthy process. Commenting on this statement, Podolyak said that Putin had already confirmed that Russia was committing deliberate war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has called on the International Committee of the Red Cross (ICRC) to help with the release of Ukrainian prisoners of war and to stop the forced displacement of Ukrainian children to Russia. According to Ukrinform, Kuleba wrote this on Twitter following a meeting with ICRC President Mirjana Spaljarik in Kiev. I met ICRC President Mirjana Spaljarik in Kiev to thank for ICRC's aid and stress the need to free our POWs. I called on ICRC to help us stop one of Russia's most heinous crimes of forceful transfer of Ukrainian children, return them home and prevent their illegal adoption, the minister said. ICRC President Mirjana Spaljarik arrived in Ukraine on a 4-day visit on December 8. In an interview with Radio Liberty, Verkhovna Rada Commissioner for Human Rights Dmytro Lubinets said that Ukraine expected the reformatting of the International Committee of the Red Cross, which has demonstrated its ineffectiveness in the context of the war in Ukraine, and did not rule out the possibility of creating an alternative organization. Photo, Dmytro Kuleba/Twitter. The European Commission has donated 40 powerful generators to Ukraine from the emergency rescue reserves of the EU Civil Protection Mechanism to help the country overcome the consequences of massive Russian attacks on energy infrastructure and ensure conditions for the survival of the country's population in winter conditions. According to Ukrinform, the European Commission said this in a statement posted on Twitter. Winter in Ukraine will be cold and dark, as Russia's missiles continue to target vital energy infrastructure. We have mobilized our emergency #rescue reserves to send 40 generators to Ukraine. This 220 kVA generator can provide power supply to an entire hospital, the tweet reads. Winter in Ukraine will be cold and dark, as Russia's missiles continue to target vital energy infrastructure. We have mobilized our emergency #rescue reserves to send 40 generators to Ukraine. This 220 kVA generator can provide power supply to an entire hospital. #standwithukrainepic.twitter.com/tbed1vrmzh, European Commission, European Union, @EU_Commission, December 10, 2022. Earlier, as part of the Civil Protection Mechanism, the EU sent another batch of emergency aid to Ukraine weighing 1,800 tons, including equipment for the energy sector, which was formed thanks to the efforts of Belgium, Finland, Germany, Slovakia, Luxembourg, and Sweden. The EU continues to provide Ukraine with humanitarian aid, which includes energy supplies, shelter items, first aid kits, protecting clothing, firefighting equipment, water trucks, and buses, amongst others. All EU member states have sent support to Ukraine via the mechanism. Russian terrorist forces currently hold 150 Ukrainian citizens in captivity in Olenivka, Donetsk region. Verkhovna Rada Human Rights Commissioner Dmytro Lubinets said this in an interview with Radio Liberty, Ukrinform reports. We are not allowed there again. Apparently, we will get access to Olenivka only after our armed forces liberate Olenivka. According to our information, 150 Ukrainian citizens remain there at the moment. It is not only the military, Lubinets said. When asked about the possibility of exchanging representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, for Ukrainians detained in Russia, he noted that he would not like to escalate the issue specifically with representatives of the Church. I can say that if any Russian citizen is of interest to the Russian authorities, we are ready to consider any options for returning them to Russian territory for the return of our heroes. We can exchange only prisoners of war. We can release civilians only as part of, perhaps, some mutual obligations. Or, for example, after conviction, we can send them to Russian territory to serve their terms. It is very important for us, first of all, to find legal grounds. And we do have them. By the way, we have different options. And secondly, yes, we are ready to do it, Lubinets said. On July 29, at the former penal colony No. 210 in Olenivka, in the temporarily occupied territory of Donetsk region, a powerful explosion obliterated a barrack where Ukrainian prisoners of war were transferred to ahead of the incident. According to the Russian side, nearly 50 Ukrainian defenders were killed and more than 70 others were seriously injured. The European Union condemned a Russian court judgment sentencing Russian opposition politician Ilya Yashin to 8.5 years in prison for spreading information about the crimes of the Russian army in Ukraine and called for his immediate release, as well as for the release of all political prisoners in Russia. According to Ukrinform, an EU spokesperson said this in a statement published on the website of the European External Action Service on December 9. A Moscow court today sentenced the Russian politician Ilya Yashin to 8.5 years in prison for his reporting about atrocities committed by Russia's armed forces against Ukrainian civilians in Bucha. Today's court decision is politically motivated and unacceptable. The EU calls on Russia's authorities to release Ilya Yashin and all other political prisoners in Russia immediately and unconditionally, the statement said. The EU spokesperson noted that Russia's so-called fake news law, which was used in the case against Yashin, aims at censoring and silencing independent voices and at preventing them from questioning, criticizing, and reporting factually about Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, and illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. On December 9, a Moscow court sentenced Russian opposition politician Ilya Yashin to 8.5 years in prison on charges of spreading false information about the Russian army. After serving the term, Yashin will be barred from using the internet for 4 years. The public prosecutor demanded that the politician be sentenced to 9 years in prison. Military units of the command of the Ukrainian Naval Infantry Corps destroyed an enemy infantry fighting vehicle and 6 Russian soldiers in the past day. The Ukrainian Navy said this in a statement on Telegram, Ukrinform reports. According to the statement, the final losses of the enemy are being specified. Between February 24 and December 10, the defense forces of Ukraine eliminated about 93,760 Russian aggressors, including 370 in the past day alone. At the request of the United States, the Moroccan authorities have decided to transfer spare parts for T-72 tanks to Ukraine, becoming the first African country to provide military assistance to Kyiv. That's according to Le Journal de l'Afrique, Ukrinform reports. According to the report, U.S. diplomats managed to convince Rabat to transfer spare parts for T-72 tanks to Kyiv in the greatest secrecy. The Royal Moroccan Armed Forces have several dozen tanks of the T-72B/BK type, purchased in 1999 to 2001 from Belarus, the report said. The Russian army shelled the Kherson region 51 times on Friday, December 9. Deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine Kyrylo Tymoshenko said this in a post on Telegram, Ukrinform reports. According to him, the Russians used mortars, MLRS, and cannon artillery. Tymoshenko said that 2 people had been killed and 8 injured in the shelling. Residential areas of the city of Kherson were affected. The enemy damaged a hospital, shops, and warehouses. Enemy shells also damaged industrial infrastructure, he wrote. On December 10, enemy shelling knocked down electricity in parts of Kherson. Today we were talking about those news. President Zelensky named Person of the Year by Austria's Profil. Some main high-voltage grids damaged in Russia's drone attack on Odesa region. Military cooperation between Iran, Russia is a matter of global security, Podolyak. Kuleba calls on Red Cross to stop transfer of Ukrainian children to Russia. European Commission sends 40 electric generators to Ukraine. 150 Ukrainians held in Olenivka prison, Lubinets. EU calls for immediate release of Ilya Yashin, other political prisoners in Russia. Ukrainian Marines destroy enemy IFV, 6 Russian soldiers in past day. Morocco will be first African country to provide military aid to Ukraine, media. Russians shell Kherson region 51 times in past 24 hours, 2 people killed.